to Exploring Next Generation Education. Our topic for today is addressing trauma as students return to school. I'm Hiller Spires, Executive Director of the Friday Institute at North Carolina State University, and I'll be your host for today's session. Whether it results from a singular, multiple, or long-term repetitive experience, the feeling of being intensely threatened constitutes trauma, which is our topic of discussion today. Children and adolescents may be exposed to traumatic events such as national disasters, medical trauma, family violence, and bullying, to name a few. On a global scale, the COVID-19 pandemic has elicited emotional distress and fear, pulling us into what some are calling mass trauma. For example, a CDC report from last summer found that mental health conditions are disproportionately affecting young adults during the pandemic. That is, 25% of young adults were found to have seriously considered suicide, an increase from 10% of young adults pre-pandemic. With this in mind, our time here today is dedicated to increasing our understandings about what it means for teachers and students to return to school and inspire our planning efforts as we seek to acknowledge and mitigate the ways that trauma has occurred and continues to unfold in students and educators' lives today. I'm excited to introduce our first panelist who will share research they've been conducting on trauma with educators and children in North Carolina. First, Brittany Miller. She is a research associate at the Friday Institute. Welcome, Brittany. Next, we have Dr. Angela Wiseman, associate professor in the College of Education. Welcome, Angela. And next, Kiana Cryer-Coupé, an associate professor in the School of Social Work. I'm going to turn it over now to Brittany, and the other two researchers will share their results, after which we will have an expert panel respond to the research. Brittany, I'll turn it over to you.
Absolutely. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. So give me just a second. I need to present. All right. Like Hiller did an awesome introduction on our topic, is we're really digging into and taking a look at trauma as students return to school and what we need to be considering, because they are coming back more traumatized than likely prior semesters at school. So that's what we're really digging into. And this came out of a partnership between NC State's College of Education, the Friday Institute for Educational Innovation, as well as NC State's School of Social Work. And so Kiana, Angela, and I worked collaboratively in collecting a lot of different data on where our students are, where teachers are when it comes to trauma. And Angela and Kiana in just a moment are going to share some of those findings before we talk to our panel about how we make some of this actionable and what can we do about it. But as a quick background, my background is mostly in adult learning and professional development, and how we can support teachers in creating the change that we hope to see in schools. So that's just a really quick introduction to me, but I'm going to turn it over to Kiana real quick, who's going to talk about some of her work.
Thank you, Brittany, and welcome everyone again this evening. So just as another point of background, Angela and I met about 4 years ago. We were both doing work with a group of fathers who were in recovery for substance use disorders. And so Angela's background, she is a professor in literacy education, and I'm a professor in social work. We were working to disrupt some of the trauma that fathers were experiencing as a result of their own traumas, because they were experiencing homelessness or returning to the community post-incarceration, and even suffering from substance use disorders. And so we began working together on a literacy intervention with fathers at that substance use treatment facility. And from that work, we thought about how we would go about training social workers and teachers who were pre-service to be able to do similar interventions. And that's really how we began the work that we'll talk about today in terms of assessing those outcomes. Next slide. So we've already had a brief introduction to what we are talking about when we say trauma, and for us to kind of be on the same page. And so as we think about trauma and adverse childhood experiences, ACEs is a term that's often used a lot. It's a very hot topic or buzzword that's used a lot now. But in our research, we use the definition of trauma that is espoused by the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. So family traumas being anything frightening, often life-threatening, violent, events that happen to one or all members of the family and that can impact optimal family functioning. And so when we look at the ACEs framework, we know that there are 3 different categories that ACEs traditionally fall in. And so those would be abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. And having an issue in any of these areas could be considered a family trauma. Next slide. And so as was alluded to in our earlier introduction, when we think about what's happening in the context of families and as it relates to trauma during the dual pandemics that we've been dealing with for the past 18 months in terms of thinking about racialized violence as well as the COVID-19 pandemic, we know that trauma is impacting children and families of all ages. So it's not just elementary age children, not just COVID babies like the one that's sitting on my lap, but children of all ages and in different types of families and family formations. And so when we look at data from the CDC, a study that was done looking at mental health visits between 2019 and 2020, we see that there's been a 44% increase in the number of mental health visits amongst children and adolescents in our country. And this data also suggests that individuals from BIPOC communities are disproportionately impacted in terms of thinking about the impacts of the traumas that we've seen, as well as individuals that are from low socioeconomic backgrounds. All of these issues together are highlighting racial disparities that have existed for generations in our country and are now more intensified as we think about the existence of these dual pandemics. Next slide.
We're going to take a moment just to kind of pause before we dig into some of the specific information that some of the data we collected about North Carolina. But we want to ask you first really quickly if pick between which is closest to your field. So whether you are social work or education, if you're pick the closest to your work, if you're something a little bit outside of those 2 major topic areas. But we just wanted to capture really quick who we had in the audience. And I will add that we will be taking questions from the audience at the very end. We do want to get to our panelists as efficiently as possible. So don't feel like we're not answering your questions right now. We will answer them as it comes to the end. And it looks like we have about 23% work of our guests work in social work and 77% work in education. So we're going to go ahead and close that poll. I have one more question for you. Let me share results so you can see it real quick. And we have one more poll question because this is going to tie into what we do, especially as we talk to our panelists, is how prepared do you feel from your position and your role to provide trauma-informed support in your professional context? You know, wherever you are, what setting you are, and what role you are, do you feel very prepared, adequately prepared, somewhat prepared, less prepared, or not at all prepared? Yes, that is a Likert scale. A couple more seconds to respond to that question really quickly. And it looks like, just looking at our preliminary results, is what we find in this group is very much reflective of what we found in larger North Carolina, that a lot of people feel somewhat or less prepared to address trauma within their context. And very rarely does someone feel very prepared or adequately prepared unless that's specifically what they do. So a lot of people, a lot of educators, you know, feel a little unsure about what do we do about the realities that our kids are coming to our classes with. So I'm going to go ahead and end poll, and you can see the results really quickly. So you'll see about you know, a little over 10% feel very or adequately prepared, while the majority feel somewhat or less. So from there, I'm going to turn it over to Angela, who's going to speak more to the specific work that we did before we hear from our panelists.
Hi, everyone. I want to talk to you about the project that we conducted, Brittany, Kiana, and me. And to start off, there were three main aims of the project. So the first one was that we had a survey that we administered to teachers and social workers to understand the background experiences, professional preparation, and needs of both teachers and social workers. Then we conducted focus groups and observations and interviews, and to really understand what we were seeing from the survey data, to delve deeper from a qualitative standpoint. From this, we're planning and delivering a webinar for in-service teachers and social workers addressing the needs of children, really thinking about the trauma-informed perspective. And if we could go to the next slide. So we have been collecting data, and we're in the process of analyzing it now. We had a survey and also conducted a survey in North Carolina. So one was nationwide, one was specific to North Carolina, and then we've been holding focus groups up through the end of May, maybe June, with 50 teachers and social workers to find out more. And if we could go to the next slide, I'll show you. Really, we're looking at this in terms of a framework where we find that it's important to understand personal experiences. What is your own background with trauma and understanding and experiencing trauma? What kind of needs, that's the needs assessment, are you seeing in your professional context? And finally, what kind of preparation have you had or might you need to address the trauma that you've experienced on those levels? So we see this as kind of a three-part framework for understanding this. Next slide.
So as Brittany just alluded to, we're just sharing a little bit of the data from the national survey here. Today, we're going to primarily focus on the findings that we have from the focus groups in North Carolina. But when we look at our national data comparing teachers and social workers, we found that only 11% of teachers in our survey responded that they felt extremely prepared to address family trauma in their settings, whereas about 47% of social workers felt extremely prepared. And so although we see this disparity between the professions, we espouse that this is a perfect combination in terms of being able to help one another in the school space to best address the needs of families and address the needs of our community in general. So we wanted to show that data. Next slide, please. And so I'll start off by sharing some of the findings from our qualitative interviews and focus groups with social workers. There were four main themes that came out in terms of the results of that work. And so the social workers that we talked to, these were social workers who worked in schools, who worked in community agencies, who were working throughout the pandemic on the front lines. Many of them started out by talking about this idea of the personal versus the professional trauma experiences, and really wanted to highlight the fact that we not forget that our professionals were also living with and dealing with this pandemic in the context of their own lives, even while showing up and being helpers in the spaces that they were needed within our community. And so really having those personal experiences, some from childhood and some as a result of all that's gone on since 2020, really was at the forefront of their minds in terms of how they intervened with the families that they were working with. Of the 20 social workers that we talked to, every one of them talked about personal experiences that colored the ways in which they showed up to work. Next was this idea, we asked questions or probed about how prepared they felt to engage families and others within the community in terms of addressing family trauma. And oftentimes we heard a response in terms of individuals saying that they were building the plane while they were flying it. And so in terms of resources that were available in the office to support their work, resources that were available financially at the state level, it felt like a lot of folks were scrambling. Nobody really knew what to do exactly, but everyone was relying on best practices either that they gained during formal education at the BSW, so the Bachelor of Social Work level, or at the MSW level, flying that plane and trying to interact or to enact, those best practices as best they could. As the conversations went on, the merits of interprofessional training came out. So as we began to think about some of the issues that children and families were facing in North Carolina, we heard several individuals say to us that they'd seen increases in experiences of interpersonal violence amongst families that they were tasked with working with. They saw increases in the use of substances or the presentation of substance use disorders, and really talked about the importance of having a firm understanding of the social worker's scope of practice and then the scope of practice of community members or other practitioners, such as teachers, such as school administrators, who might be able to assist the family in a team setting. And so this was a finding that Angela and I thought was very important, because we have worked together with pre-service teachers and pre-service social workers on developing knowledge about each other's scopes of practice and how you can best support each other in community and school settings. Lastly, one of the things that emerged was this idea of family and professional collaboration. And so although we are all trained in our various professions, keeping in mind that families are the experts in their own experiences. So when we think about the ways in which trauma have shown up in the lives of the families that we're working with, they are the experts on those experiences. And so when we are sitting down to treatment plan or to think about what different team interventions or types of supports we want to provide, keeping the family at the center was something that was very important to the social workers that we talked to, and being able to collaborate with those families to best address those needs was at the forefront as well. So, next slide, please.
So I'm going to report on the findings from the focus groups with teachers, and you'll see that there are some overlaps in similarities, and there's some also differences, which I think reflect some of the professional responsibilities and also the professional training of teachers and social workers. The first is many teachers talked about lack of professional knowledge that either they had experienced with dealing with trauma and racialized violence, or they were seeing it in their schools in general. There were many concerns articulated about learning loss, particularly as kids responded to the pandemic with increased responsibilities in their families, which may, or other types of things that interfered with them being able to access and really focus on education. Technology was a really important factor, and we've read about that, but they saw it. They really saw that it was hard to connect with students on Zoom. One teacher actually described the students as shadows. They weren't seeing the full person, and they were often seeing just the square show up. So technology became very significant to just thinking about that. And then finally, very similar to with the social workers, teachers reported a need for self-care because of what they had gone through, both professionally and personally. So I think similarly to the social workers, addressing the level of stress that they had been through is part of how they were, a significant aspect of dealing with what's been happening in the past year or so.
Now that we've kind of set a background and where all these ideas have come from, we want to transition now to hear from Voices for the Field. And I'm going to be facilitating the conversation. We do have some questions set up for our panelists, but if you have questions as they share their stories and perspective, please add them in the chat. We are keeping an eye on it, and we will have time at the end for audience questions. So please feel free to set those up. And if we have time at the end, we will ask our panelists your questions as well. But first, I'm going to talk to Delicia. I have a first question that we're going to start with, because she's a principal at Elizabeth City Middle School. I want you to kind of describe your experience with interdisciplinary collaboration with other professionals to support students with ACEs. And we're talking about, social workers and teachers and what work you've done in your school.
So good evening. My name is, again, Delicia Moore. I have been the principal here at Elizabeth City Middle School. This is my 4th year. And I went to a board meeting to listen to the work that was being done with North Carolina Resilience and Learning. It is a project with the North Carolina Public School Forum, and they was doing a very interesting presentation on the ACEs, and how that work and the brain functions of kids that are in trauma. And so I had probably just finished my second month of Elizabeth City Middle School, and definitely a different experience coming to a middle school. This is my 21st year in education. 16 years of that was high school, 1 year in elementary, but still none of that had prepared me for middle school. And some of the experiences that I dealt with here in just my first year with mental health, just kind of even sixth graders were already cutting and just having thoughts of suicide, not being able to function, watching parents come in whom were, not much difference in age, not able to function and just kind of being very inappropriate, realizing that we needed a lot of help. We were struggling. We had kids that were hospitalized to facilities that were being released and coming directly back to school, and us having no clue as to how to help and serve them. So we knew before we could educate them, we needed to deal with the mental health and just how unprepared our school district, and finding really quickly, not just our school district, but our state was very unprepared for the work that we needed to do. So we jumped in with North Carolina Resilience and Learning. And when I tell you they transformed us because the first work they had to do was with the staff. We had to overcome a lot of our childhood trauma in order to be able to help our students, because what we realized is that they began to be triggers for us. And so to be able to even help them deal with their triggers, we had to deal with our childhood trauma. So we started with our staff. We started with our Mr. Jones. He was hired as our restorative facilitator because we had to reform everything that we did at Elizabeth City Middle School, how we disciplined. But before we could even get the staff to understand like restorative discipline, restorative instruction, it had to start with me. So I had to learn a lot in a very short time with getting the proper training. What I loved about North Carolina Resilience and Learning is that they were feet on the ground. They came to us, they worked with us, they walked with us. They walked with me to do walkthroughs through my school classrooms, sitting in classrooms, sitting in small groups. They worked with my restorative facilitator. They worked with our administrative team, our teachers. And so we started working on the adults in the building first before we could even touch the kids. So that work was definitely needed.
Thank you, Delicia, for sharing your story. We're going to hear from the restorative facilitator that was mentioned a little bit later, but next we're going to transition to Kevin. And your question for the panel is, what strategies have you observed or implemented to support trauma in your professional context? And if you'll do a quick little introduction to about your background as well first.
Yes, my name is Kevin Neely. I am currently working at a Wake County Public School. It's an alternative school who uses restorative practices. So I was really glad to hear that. I'm actually an alum of the School of Social Work. That's where I received my MSW. I also have my LCSW. I've been working in Wake County for 20 years, and I've been in the sort of urban setting in Raleigh for that entire time. I do have a puppy, so I apologize. It's not a child in my lap, but there is a puppy in the background. So if I'm making a lot of noise, I apologize. I thought the question that you asked was really interesting about the strategies. And I feel like our strategies in many ways have not, I almost want to say they have not changed, because in the role of a social worker or student assistance program coordinator or a school counselor, at least in high school, often what we're doing is assessing the barriers for a student's success. And it's in that, hopefully non-judgmental, we all have our own judgments, so hopefully we've done our own work. When we're assessing those barriers, we then are able to utilize the resources available to us to support that family. And it really does come from, I was really glad, I think it was Kiana that mentioned, that the families are the experts. I think that we attempt to use a strength-based approach to see the families as experts and ask them what it is that they feel like they might need. And that may also be, to some degree, part of the, I feel like it is part of our social work training to work to empower people. I don't have the answers. I often don't even have the answers for myself. So I'm not going to try to think that I'm going to be the expert for someone else. And I do think that Wake County does a very good job at training. And just from like the sort of inside of Wake County, we're offered CRIM training, trauma-informed care training. We're offered a myriad training opportunities, kind of depending on, whether we're elementary or middle or high school. I think the strategy that I've seen, I want to use this as a strategy, but most employed for the pandemic period seems to be this combination of reminding us to take care of ourselves while we're taking care of others. And in the time when I've been in Wake County, I don't think I've heard a superintendent mention so many times grace, like offering families grace, offering ourselves grace, and really looking at every individual family and their individual needs. It's very, very difficult to do at a comprehensive high school. Like I said, I'm in an alternative school. We have a little bit more staff and we have less population. But even at one of the comprehensive high schools when I was there, that was the strategy, to assess an individual family's needs, and then be able, and then attempt to match what we know of is in the community. So I feel like that answers the question. Perhaps there has to be a follow-up from that. But I feel like we're employing the same strategies, just more people maybe need them, or maybe not. Maybe more people have needed them all along, and more people are feeling empowered to ask for help because more people are asking them if they need help. Maybe it's been going on all along, but because we're asking the questions, there may be more people that are willing to say that they need support or access to resources.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing, Kevin. And I think that's an interesting perspective there at the end as well. Next, we're going to hear from Darlene. And if you'll do a quick little introduction about what you do, as well as kind of respond to the question about what professional development you have led that was related to trauma. We'll share that.
I'm Darlene Johnson, and I have been a social worker for over 30 years, probably a little more over 30 years. Before I joined NCSU and teaching the school social work course, I was the director of school social work services for Wake County Schools. And I think one of the most important things that I saw for staff was professional development, was professional development. And that was a focus on much of what I wanted to provide the social workers. I think for how I see professional development for myself at that time and even now is, I think that understanding ACEs, and again, ACEs has been around for a few years, and there really was a good job that communities, counties, school districts, nonprofits did around ACEs and understanding ACEs and the impact that brain development had. And when we took it within the schools, we really began to look at teachers, all staff who have triggers. And I think Delisha and Kevin had said so eloquently that we all have triggers because somewhere along the line, most of us have some type of trauma that can be listed on the ACEs checklist. So I think that that's one of the most important things, to understand what it is, how it affects ourselves, and how it affects our students and families and communities. So I think that to get a handle on that, I think more professional development could be done on that. I also think understanding our triggers and how we walk into classrooms, how we even read emails from parents. I think that can be something that we can get triggered on. Also, I think classroom setup, I think professional development, even when social workers walk into a classroom, maybe to do some groups with students or observations. I do think, as Ms. Moore said, it really does start with our administrators. And as Kevin said, it really starts with our superintendents and our state superintendent, as far as what sort of follows in line with training, with being able to support students. I think when we look at how we set up classrooms, and for me to understand social emotional learning and how we are to infuse that into everyday learning, and to even coming into the classroom, coming into the school, who are the safe people within that. I think training goes beyond our teachers, our administrators, support, our student support services staff, or psychologists and counselors and social workers. I think it even extends to our bus drivers and to our lunch personnel that really have sort of, we have, everyone has an impact on our children, and understanding our own stuff, so that we are able to understand ourselves in these situations, and how we can identify students that have anxiety, depression, families who may be who may be going through homelessness, who maybe have someone in the family that is incarcerated. How do we support that? How do we identify it? I think also Mr. Jones is going to talk about restorative practices. I think that's also another piece of professional development. It's something that I was very interested in, and I believe that it really is a way to reach our students in the classrooms, having circle time for elementary school students, having restorative practices to build relationships between our teachers, children, peer to peer. I think that's all of these things are intertwined, but it takes a really strong county to be able to implement the professional development in a way that can be really implemented. We take the information, which is something that I think everybody hears, and we understand bits and pieces of it, but taking that information so that we are able to really develop a good, solid plan that fits our schools, our classrooms, our state, that really fits our families and our communities and our children that come to school every day. I think that's, being able to have mental health professionals within our school, and where are they? For school social workers, understanding the resources in the community and how to link services with families and students. At the beginning of the year, having a really strong understanding and needs assessments, and being able to partner with administration and being able to have those needs assessments. So you're really looking at what it is that you need rather than thinking you know what everybody needs. So that's just a little bit of the thoughts that I have for professional development and what I've grown to love and learn from. But there's a lot more to learn.
Thank you, Darlene. Yes, there is so much to it and so much involved. And I'm going to transition next to Irvin, who's going to speak a little bit about, if you'll talk first, Irvin, about some of the things that you've done in order to create, this new program within your school and expand on it. And your question at the end is also, what do you feel is the most pressing needs related to trauma in your school or more broadly? So if you want to speak a little bit about what's been going on at Elizabeth City Middle School, but also what do you feel do we really need to consider when it comes to trauma in schools?
So I really don't like you right now because I'm here writing all this information down. My brain is a sponge. I'm going, but I am Irvin Jones, a restorative facilitator for Elizabeth City Middle School, and I've been here for about 3.5 years now. It's been my life journey. Big shouts out to North Carolina Resilience Learning Project and the NC Forum. I feel like this is where I'm supposed to be. With that said, I agree. Let's start off with this. The program that we have at Elizabeth City would not be successful if not top down. Let's get that perfectly clear. Because I have great leadership that believes in the practices of restorative facilitating and SEL and the ACE and all the things I'm going to talk about in the brief moments I have. That's why we're successful. Believing in the works for Elizabeth City Middle School. So with that, here we just believe in, we started with the staff first and we got staff together. And so I'm going to jump back and forth. So the first thing my leadership came up with, we have to take care of our staff first. Does anybody on here, would you go to a barbershop and his hair was raggedy, his groom was raggedy? Would you go to a doctor that he's trying to heal you and he's coughing? So we learned in our school that we had to fix our teachers first, get them right. So it was self-care. Self-care was big in our school. So we started with our teachers, because even though we deem them as superheroes, they're human. They're human and they have life. They have things going on along with the secondary trauma that they get from the kids. So we started off with the restorative practice, restoring their power as teachers, getting down to their age number, getting down to what their triggers were. And so we came up with this thing that we kind of got rid of the ISS best we could. And we tried not to suspend our kids. So we came up with this room that I'm in now, which is called the rest room. It's a place that the kid come in and regroup. So the rest is recognize that there's a problem. So they come in and recognize there's a problem. And then we educate ourselves on the problem or the trauma. And then once we educate ourselves, then we solve. So let me break that down right quick. So how we don't give, if you're bleeding internally, we don't give you chest compressions. We try to educate ourselves on the exact trauma that is going on. And so once we educate ourselves on the trauma, we turn to the solve part. So let's do the work we've done here. And then once we do the work, we recognize that Mr. Jones or the team doesn't really give grades. We got to transition you back to class. We got to transition you back to a learning environment. So again, that's what we've done here. It's been pretty successful, I believe. But the most powerful thing is that we've done at Elizabeth City Middle School is our leader believes in self-care. It's self-care. We have to take care of those who take care of our babies. We have to start with self-compassion, let teachers knowing what their triggers are, what their ACE number is big. how one teacher is raised, as adverse child experience, is the way he or she is gonna teach. So we try to reshape the mind. So we've used a little acronym at Elizabeth City Middle School is we use the CAN method. We ask every teacher to be clear communication. We ask every teacher to have clear communication. I'm gonna say it again, clear communication. We ask every teacher to have accountability, proactive accountability. We don't wait for something to go wrong. And then we have this one thing that works for us in our leadership. Big shouts out to Ms. Moore. No nonsense. If we've already communicated what we're gonna do, and we are proactive on helping you not fall in those traps, then we're no nonsense about the outcome. So, and our teachers understand because we use this CAN method. Even when we had the whole Andrew Brown thing in our community, our leadership, we practiced the self-care. We took our whole staff away from campus and we went to the waterfront. It was the idea I came up with through the NC North Carolina Resilience and my boss, Ms. Moore, and we took everybody out and did self-care and came back, and through these self-cares, the things we do here, we were able to deal with one of the hardest days of the day. Our teachers are like, it was a hard day, but we got each other. So in my opinion, it's self-care. We have to take care of our soldiers. Our teachers are the ones on the battlefield. Not so much the admin, but if we take care of our teachers, we straight. So that's what we've done. It's self-care, in my opinion. It works over here. De-stress, I like that. De-stress for success. That's absolutely right. And we believe here, look, if today was a hard day, let's shake it off and move it again. Because you know what? Our leader has us. And so we wouldn't go to war because our leader is tough.
Thank you so much, Irvin. I'm going to go back through and I'm going to have one question that I want every panelist to answer through. So we'll go back in the order that we just went through. But for a district that is interested, regardless of their role, if there's someone that's in a district, a teacher, a social worker, a leadership that is interested in getting started in restoration, but it doesn't currently exist in their school, where would be the place that you would tell them to start? And we'll have to keep it kind of brief because we'll try to go through everyone, but where would you tell that person to start working? And Delisha, I'll just kind of start with you.
Again, so I started my work with North Carolina Resilience and Learning. It was a lot that I didn't know, and they were the professionals. And so because of just them, the ability to come to the school, it's different when they're talking and you can see the work they've done with someone else. But I need to see that with my kids and my staff. And so they were amazing.
Absolutely, Kevin, I'll hop over to you.
Yes, what Wake County has been working with Campbell's law clinic, John Powell. He's been sort of spearheading bringing restorative practices to Wake County, and then of course within Wake County leadership, obviously Darlene Johnson was a big part of that when she was there, and the current director, and I don't really always remember all of the names at central office of their positions, but all the people that support us are bringing in restorative practices. And at our school, it was our principal. That's what she wants. Brought in the Wake County team, and so we're utilizing the restorative education.
Absolutely, Darlene. There's something a little bit different to add on to Kevin. Oh, you're muted. I'm sorry. You're muted. I'm gonna unmute you if I can. There we go.
Sorry about that. So I think that there is Wake County has done a really great job. Of course, there's Campbell Law Clinic that is right there, and they've been great partners for Wake County. I've also brought them into my course as well for teaching purposes, to be able to see it, because you don't know what it looks like until you actually see it done. And that makes a huge difference. And the circles, again, can be taught, the talking circles, which works great for elementary school students. But most likely there are places that you can find throughout North Carolina that you would be able to get training, where people would come to you, to your school district, to be trained. Just as ACEs training can be done, restorative practices also can be done. The train the trainer is a great way to be able to have, just always have that component going, so that you have people at your school or in your district that can continue the training. That's my thought.
Really, thank you. And Irvin, we'll close out with you, and then we're going to open up to the audience questions.
Well, I'm a big North Carolina Resilience Learning Project type guy. Those have been my go-tos. KSAL, Choose Love, Curriculum, all those things. And then I just network. I like to hear other people's story, because there's no cookie cut way to do this job. There's no cookie cut way to do restorative. I mean, every place is different. So it takes research. It takes digging in. Sometimes you gotta get your hands muddy in all different muds and figure out what works for you. But as long as we stay within the framework of the restorative practices, the framework of SEL, the framework of Choose Love, and that's my recommendation. And if you always reach out to my leader, and she'll get you in contact with me. But we just do what works. We just do what works for our content.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much for kind of giving us a quick introduction. I'm going to transition it to Hiller, who's going to walk us through some audience questions, and then it will be open so anyone can respond on our panel.
Thank you, Brittany, and thank you to the panelists. So informative. I really appreciate all of the insights and sharing from your heart. I really appreciate that, and I know that our audience does as well. And I think that we all want to go work at Elizabeth City Middle School, don't we? I think we all wish we could work there. Sign us up. Sign us up. I'm going to start with one question. This is from Lauren. We've touched on it, but maybe someone can kind of summarize the steps maybe that we could go through. Lauren Brummett asked, how can we ensure that our teachers and staff are fully equipped to work through these issues with our own with ourselves, as well as with the students' lives? So, I heard some responses about how to get started, but I guess, for those of you who are in this work, how do you put a process in place to really make sure that the teachers are equipped to do this kind of work?
So at Elizabeth City Middle School, we put a plan in place, a 3-year plan. Our first year, we spent the first semester just administration, working all administrators, principal, assistant principals, guidance counselors, and we hired a restorative facilitator at that time just to kind of learn the practices. We've gone to numerous workshops, and not just with North Carolina Resilience and Learning. Anything that we see that talks about restorative practices across the country, we're there. I'm sending Mr. Jones because it's really hard. Him and maybe another administrator, I'm always sending him something. Here's some PD. Because I don't know about y'all, I didn't learn this in my education program. So all of this is very new that we're having to learn. And so the second semester of the first year, we began to do that work with our teachers. We brought North Carolina Resilience and Learning here to do our professional development. And we started small because I needed to be very careful. I needed buy-in. I needed the staff to understand this was important to me. This was important to our students. And so, you know, it's really different when you're trying to get teachers to do very different things other than just kick a child out of the classroom because they're not behaving. Now we got to figure out why the child is not behaving. So we knew that was going to take some time to teach them different ways, to teach them the importance of how to do morning meetings. We started that work with modeling at the top, as Mr. Jones said. I conduct my own morning meeting with my staff every single morning. We get in this huge circle. We do shout outs. We kind of say thank you or what have you. And we do our morning chat. We, you know, we are ready, we're ready for school. And so like, we got to get ourselves pumped up. And so if you got to do that for yourself, because whatever's going on, you got to leave it at the door. Can't bring it in here. Understanding that kids cannot separate themselves from that also. So what practices do you have in place for your students to do a temperature check the very first thing in the morning to figure out which kids are not going to be set for the day for learning? And then what are you gonna do about it? Because like, don't be that trigger for them. Remember, you also have some triggers. So we had to teach ourselves how to kind of work through those triggers. So that's where Mr. Jones and my admin team, they come up with different activities for the entire school year. Every month, there's an activity that deals with taking care of the staff. I am very proud to say that I don't have a huge turnover. My folks love to be here. So I don't have to do a whole lot of hiring, which I'm excited about because they know you gotta take care of people first. And so that work kind of spills into understanding the same compassion and empathy that I have for the adults. I expect the same for these kids. It's just kind of a lot of modeling, a lot of teaching, a lot of professional development. What do you need? What is it that you don't know how to do? As Mr. Jones say, I send him to the war room. Like if I got a problem with a teacher's classroom, let's go and figure out what's going on. How can we help and support that teacher? It isn't always about classroom management. Sometimes it's about helping that teacher figure out what's really going on with that child. Are you a trigger for them? Maybe it's the way let's figure out, is it some clothes that you put on that remind them of something? Is it your perfume? It could be anything. But if you don't take the time, one, to build those relationships at the beginning of the year, you're in a losing war all year long. So for the first 10 days at Elizabeth City Middle School, don't teach anything. I need you to teach expectations. I need you to love the hell out of these kids and let them know that we care about them, that we are their biggest cheerleaders and support. But if we build that, we can get them to do anything we want them to do.
Thank you, Delisha. Really appreciate that. I think one of the things I keep hearing is like any other kind of change process that we would go through, it's real important to have the buy-in and spend the time educating the staff. And then a big factor is modeling. So that's what you guys are doing as the leaders of the school. You're modeling it at a real deep level, so it becomes the culture of the school.
Yeah,
Let's see.
and that is very true. And I'll say that to say this, because COVID has hit Elizabeth City Middle School hard. And I'm in classrooms just like they are. I'm covering classrooms. Just if they can do it, I can do it. And so that's what I show them. We're all in this together.
Right. Yeah. So we've got a question from Latasha Henry. How can we continue to build with parents who aren't supportive for the resources offered by the schools? I think that's a really important question. Would anyone like to address that?
I'd love to jump in on that because I actually do not find that to be true. I feel like, and this is my experience, that if I were to wave my magic wand, it would be to communicate and inform our parents about what is available to them. I think that sometimes their parents are reticent to come to school for help because we haven't been supportive. So, I mean, if we're not the place that they felt supported, why would they look to us to be the ones? So I guess like throwing that back a little bit to like looking at the strength-based approach is that if parents knew more I think about that in Wake County, about what we have to offer, what the community had to offer, and saw us as partners. I think that they would not be reticent to help to get the support that we offer. Our support looks like suspension. Our support looks like, putting their kid out of class. Our support doesn't look like it's supportive all the time. So I'm not willing to throw the parent under the bus on that at all. Not that I think we should throw anybody under the bus, but I'd much rather look at ourselves as professionals and continue to try to get the word out about how we can support families.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've got, let's see, Emma. Yeah, Emma's got a question.
Hand. Irvin,
Yeah, go ahead.
you wanted to respond?
So another part is we got to start to restore the practice with the school system and the parents. I mean, it's to restore the practice. Don't just start with the kids. We got to start listening to our parents. And we got to talk to each other and have empathy for both sides. Because let's be honest, like you say, Kevin, some teachers have really hurt our parents, and vice versa. So we got to start the restorative practice in that. I mean, this don't start in school. It starts with the parents. Hey, I'm sorry that you went through that. Would you give me a chance? I'll try to change. I want to change your narrative. Restorative practice works big. Just don't work for kids. It works for grown-ups too. Funny story, because I do it with my admin. When my admin not getting along, they get a restorative meeting too.
Thank you. And Latasha says this is true because some parents still have bad experiences from their own experience in school. So some of the things that they may be perceiving are actually triggers for them from their own experiences. So the cycles continue.
Can I just add one point just to piggyback on what everybody has said, is that needs assessment. If we can reach out and say, here are things that, just as Kevin and Irvin have talked about, these are things that are out there. What are some of the things that you might need? A needs assessment for individual schools, not for a district, but for individual schools. That way we know what kinds of things we need to collect in order to give out.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Let me see, Jennifer, did we get the question from Emma Drost?
She posted in the chat that she had hit the button accidentally.
Oh, okay. So we'll pass on that one. So I'm going to just take a few minutes to try to summarize some of the things that I heard. I think one of the most important things is starting with ourselves. And that is so important with this kind of work, to start with ourselves, examine our own trauma and understanding and our own triggers. And without that basic work, it's really difficult to support others in any kind of process or addressing trauma. So that's one of the truths that I heard from the panel today. So thank you for that. And then secondly, I heard, providing more professional development for educators, and especially in collaboration with social workers. I really love this partnership that Angela and Kiana have created with social work and teachers, and how, both groups can learn from each other, and sharing that knowledge just makes a richer environment within the schools to help support the educators as well as the students. And, making more space for restorative practices within our classes. Like, I feel like that's one of the things that happened with COVID, is that one of the unintended consequences is that so much more realization came to so many people that this is really important. Maybe before COVID, it was, people thought it was important, but now they see the dire necessity of it in a renewed way. And so I think that's been a kind of an object lesson for everyone during COVID, because I even think about social and emotional learning, how that was important before COVID, but since COVID is happening, it's just become more practice, a normal practice within the classroom. And then the third area, which I heard mentioned just tangentially, but I think it's important, is bring the whole school community into the process of self-awareness and education. So it's not just the teachers, right? It's not just the educators, but everyone, bring the whole group into the school process, transformation process, so everybody can be there for everybody. And I think that's just a powerful, powerful image and a practice that I think if we all could practice that more, we would make a lot more progress. Well, we're coming to an end. That went by fast, didn't that hour went by fast. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your experience. This is such an important topic and one that we could talk about for many more hours, but I will stop here and just ask you if you could to take our quick survey about your experience so that we have some feedback to go on as we plan our next session. Thank you all so much, and I hope you have a great evening. And again, thank you for sharing your insights.
And Hiller, I want to say if any College of Education students are here and need to get PGU credits, can we move to that slide? All you have to do is sign up there and I'll make sure and submit your information. And I want to thank all of our students who attended.
Great. So I hope everyone has that if you're doing the PGUs. Everybody have a great evening. Thank you.